Soon, he's going to have to come up with some answers to those trivial, annoying questions we ask every week, like, what are you actually going to do about immigration, health and the cost of living? Maybe he'll find some positive ideas under the Christmas tree. Let's see if the government's brought any goodies in for us. A little earlier, I spoke to the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden. Deputy Prime Minister Baroness Michelle Mone has today admitted that she stands to benefit from the £60 million deal struck by her husband during the pandemic for PPE that was not used. She says it's the government's fault. What's your response?
Well, I don't accept that. What I would say is that there is an ongoing investigation both by the National Crime Agency and indeed the Department of Health is suing the company concerned in civil litigation. So there's a limit to what I can say, but I don't recognise that characteristic, no. OK. The Prime Minister was in Rome yesterday, and he said that he and the Italian Prime Minister have been drawn to each other, his words. Apparently, they even shared a tender moment looking through Margaret Thatcher's papers. How are you feeling about your boss being so close to someone who, just 3 years ago, supported naming a street after a known Nazi collaborator? Well, it's always been the case that the United Kingdom government seeks to maintain strong relationships with our European allies. And what I would actually say is that after the Windsor framework and the support that we have shown for Ukraine and broader European security after Russia's invasion, there has been a real warming of relationships, not just with Italy, but the Prime Minister enjoys a very good relationship with the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and others. And I think it's important for the interests of the United Kingdom for us to pursue those warm relationships. Of course, in doing so, we're not endorsing the domestic policies of individuals. What we're doing is saying that we can work together on areas of cooperation, which is what we've done, whether it's in relation to migration or in relation to the next generation of fighter jets.
Yeah, I'm not going to go all the way back into Giorgia Meloni's history, because I think that's unfair. We all did strange things when we were young people. But Silvio Berlusconi described her as, I'm quoting here, patronising, overbearing, arrogant and offensive. That's Silvio Berlusconi using those words about somebody. Is that really the sort of person that Rishi wants to be seen as his new best friend?
Well, Trevor, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but I would take any description from Silvio Berlusconi with a pinch of salt. What the job of the British Prime Minister is, as has been with all of his predecessors, is to make sure the United Kingdom advances its interests around the world. We're advancing our interests through our relationship with Italy, whether that's through cooperation on the joint fighter programme, whether it's in relation to migration or whether it's in relation to broader European defence and security. That's a productive relationship, and I think it's one that the Prime Minister should be pursuing. All
right, let's talk about the policy issues which Mr Sunak and Signora Meloni are forming common cause about, and that's stopping the boats. Now, does Rishi Sunak, son of East African nations, really believe that immigrants are going to, as he put it yesterday, overwhelm us and destroy our democracy? Seriously?
Well, I think the Prime Minister is absolutely right to issue this warning. And indeed, it's not just a warning, it's something that we have seen elsewhere. We have seen the weaponisation of migration, for example, in the conduct of Belarus in relation to Poland. There's been warnings, I believe, from Finland in respect of the conduct of Russia. But there's a broader point here, which is that we do have to reassure people that we have got control of our borders, and we cannot have this unsustainable situation where we're enriching people smugglers, the worst people on the earth, through allowing this trade in human beings across the Atlantic, across the Channel, which is why we have introduced this legislation this week. And it's interesting, the Conservative Party, all members of the Conservative Party were in support of that, in contrast to the indifference of the Labour Party, the SNP and the Liberal Democrats.
All right, I'll let you do that. But and you know I'm not a nitpicker for language, but really, immigrants are going to overwhelm us and destroy our democracy. This is quite extreme language, isn't it? And if you, and I understand your point that the Russians have used immigrants and so on, but if you hear that from your own Prime Minister and you are of an immigrant background, it's not nice.
Well, I don't think the Prime Minister meant it in that way at all. What the Prime Minister meant was, and indeed I think it's incumbent on mainstream politicians like myself and the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party to make sure that we deal with legitimate public concerns about uncontrolled migration. Okay. And that's why it's important that we have taken these measures. And I would say that is really a choice that we face between us actually being willing to grasp difficult decisions, I don't doubt they're difficult, versus the failure of the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats or others to vote for this legislation when it came before Parliament last week. That's a contrast for the British people to decide on.
OK, never mind the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party. On the Rwanda bill, when it comes back after the new year, it's people in your own party, on the right of your party, who are promising trouble. What concessions are you going to offer to Mr Francois and his colleagues?
Well,
they say it's not going to work.
We believe that this is a good piece of legislation. The essence of this legislation is making sure that we end this vicious cycle of constant litigation seeking to frustrate the deportation of people who've come illegally to this country and cannot be returned to their home country, saying they should go to Rwanda. We think we've got the balance right to disapply relevant pieces of legislation that are precluding that from happening.
I know that's your intention, but
so
you've got to get the votes together.
Well, actually, it was interesting to me that the Conservative Party, of course we debated this vigorously, but in the end, the vast majority of Conservative MPs walked through the lobbies to support that legislation, and not one voted against it. Now, we'll listen to our colleagues about how we can improve this legislation. Of course we will, but I think this is a good piece of legislation that does the job, which is about ensuring that we control migration.
So you can envisage that there will be changes to this bill?
Well, of course we don't rule out amendments, and of course we will engage with it. That's what happens with any piece of parliamentary legislation. What I would say, though, is that the Prime Minister is a pretty rigorous person. He's looked through this very carefully, turned it upside down, shaken it around. He's pretty sure this is the best thing that we can get. But of course, if there's other ways of improving it, we'll be open to doing that.
OK, you're open to change. All right, well, look, the Prime Minister's pretty rigorous. Let's have a rigorous look at his school report. You had 5 pledges. Now, by our reckoning, done 1. That is, halve inflation. And let's be honest, Deputy Prime Minister, that's the Bank of England that did that. What is the point of your government with these other 4?
Well, in relation to inflation, that's certainly not I don't know whether it was you, Trevor, but many commentators were saying in the middle of the year, inflation is out of control, you're not going to meet it. So you can't now say that when we do that we haven't done it. In relation to growing the economy, actually, you can see the numbers have shown that we have bounced back stronger now than France, Germany and many other countries.
5%. That's not a trampoline.
Of course, this is against the backdrop of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, rocketing oil prices and so on, but we have got the economy
growing. Oil
growing.
prices are down.
And in relation to debt, actually, if you look at the numbers from the autumn statement, the Chancellor has shown that debt will be falling over the course of this Parliament. And in relation to small boats, if you'd said at the beginning of the year... I'll come back to waiting list, don't worry. If you'd said at the beginning of the year that we'd actually managed to reduce the number of people coming to this country by small boats by a third, when if you look, say, at Italy, where it's up 80%, I think people would accept that that's progress. Of course, with waiting lists, we have challenges, not least with the junior doctors' strike. But even then, it is worth noting that we've virtually eliminated a waiting list of over 18 months.
Well, you say it's a problem and so on, but actually that number there, 7.71 million, is a record. It is a record for what they technically call RTTs. And it's not going down. The trend is upwards. Whatever it is that you are doing is not working. So you are not, unless you do something very different, going to meet that pledge that is the one that I think people most care about.
Well, of course it's the case that we have had this extraordinary pandemic. I know people don't want to talk about it, but that was the thing Trevor, that was the thing that... No, actually, the numbers were falling before the pandemic hit on many measures. Of course, with the pandemic, that's put unprecedented pressure On top of that, we've then added on the junior doctor strike and the consultant strike until recently. That has put pressure on, but we're putting record investment in, over £12 billion extra just this year. We've got our plans for the long-term workforce plan. We will make progress on this, but I don't doubt that it's challenging.
All right, look, I won't torture you anymore on the 5 pledges. But what struck me is that I don't think you've hit these, but you're adding new pledges. Are you actually, for example, going to curb the use of social media for 16-year-olds?
Well, you'll have to wait for announcements in that area. I don't think we've actually made a formal policy announcement in respect
so that's possible.
What I do think, and I saw this when I was digital secretary, and I see it speaking to my constituents elsewhere, there is a real worry from parents about how they can protect their children from the harms of social media. Now, of course, as a Conservative, I don't want to reach for a lever of banning, but we need to look at how we can protect children online, and I think any reasonable government should do that.
I want to come back to this issue of what a Conservative looks like right now, but let me ask you about one other thing that you seem to have added, which is, or have not added, rather. We were promised guidance for schools on the issue of trans, gender reassignment. Where is it?
Well, this is a very serious issue, and the guidance will be coming forward very shortly. At the heart of this, we need to rebalance our approach and make sure that parents are put at the heart of our approach. We need to put all children's safety first, and I think we need to have an appropriate scepticism about social transitioning, whilst, of course, respecting children that are in that situation. And this guidance will give clarity on these issues to parents and to teachers, putting parents at the heart of decisions and protecting the safety of all children.
You've been saying it's coming shortly for quite a long time. Will we see it this year?
Well, I very much hope we will see it imminently, but you'll have to wait for the announcements on that, Trevor.
All right. Can I just ask you, you've written an article this morning in which you attack doomsters and you refer to amateur BBC pundits offering as much insight as you could on football tactics. Do you want to say who you had in mind there?
Well, I think it's fairly obvious some of the people that have been spewing their views forth on this. But I think
could the words Gary Lineker be floating through this conversation?
Well, I think people should swim in their own lane. I know nothing about football punditry. I can assure you of that. And the wider point I was making is that, again, there's lots of talk about talking this country down. Actually, I see a country where we have a manufacturing sector now larger than France's. We're dominating in artificial intelligence. There's so many reasons to be optimistic about this country. And this sort of this doomsday scenario that they're constantly predicting doesn't actually happen because there's real strength in our economy. So
the message to my fellow political anchor, Gary Lineker, is stay in your lane.
I think each person should play to their strengths, Trevor.
All right. Well, let's look at your strengths. At the beginning of the year, Mr. Sunak was a great strength. He was 30% more popular than his party. Now look where he is. He is just as disliked by the British public as he's just as disliked by as his party. He's the dark blue line. Tory party is the light blue line. What's he going to do to claw back that 30 point fall in his personal popularity?
Well, what I've seen in Rishi Sunak over many years, and certainly as Prime Minister, is somebody that works incredibly hard and deals with the difficult and thorny issues that we face as a country. And of course, when you're making those difficult decisions, you don't win short-term popularity. But if you look at what he's managed to do, whether it's agreeing the Windsor framework, whether it's in relation to reform of A-levels, signing up to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, those things I'm confident will, over the course of the next year, will yield results. We're not focused on short-term popularity. We're focused on making sure that we do the right thing for the country.
You're actually getting no popularity. Let me just ask you a couple of things to associate with this. The things Mr. Sunak is now associated with: Rwanda. Everybody does maths forever. Stop kids buying cigarettes. You said a moment ago, there's certain things Tories don't do. All of these things seem pretty un-Tory. You're turning the Conservative Party into the Conservative and nanny state party.
I would say it's actually totally the opposite. Conservatives are committed to controlling migration. That's our Rwanda policy. Conservatives are committed to making sure every kid gets the best start in life. That's our maths policy. I could go on, but it sounds as if you're trying to draw this interview to a close.
And the Rwanda policy is not just about stopping the return of Mr. Farage, is it?
It's about the best thing for our country, full stop.
Deputy Prime Minister, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, with us throughout the show today is our panel. The former Director General of the BBC, former Chair of the Football Association, that's Greg Dyke. The former Downing Street Director of Communications, that's Guto Harry. And the political editor of Bloomberg News, Kitty Donaldson. It's great, Kitty, you've actually got a job, the rest of us. Guto, you actually spent some time in Rome. Tell us what you think this new relationship with Giorgia Meloni is all about.
It's fascinating, isn't it? The Italians are very, very good at seduction. And I
didn't expect to start there on Sunday morning.
And clearly she has seduced our Prime Minister and he's having a ball. And she's now available. And I saw some Italian journalist friends yesterday and they were pointing out that she's dumped her partner for behaving badly. And so this is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. In all seriousness, of all the people around Europe to pick to sort of go and have a big, outrageous public flirtation with, it's an interesting choice. Tony Blair did it with Silvio Berlusconi in a bandana, and we were all sort of slightly mortified and embarrassed to be British at the time. Meloni has turned out to be much more capable as Prime Minister than people had feared, much wiser. She's marginalised the lunatics in her party. Maybe there's some useful tips there for Rishi Sunak. But he turned down the Greek Prime Minister, didn't even see him, and then he flies to Italy to masquerade with somebody who certainly comes from, the fringes of the right. So what's going on?
Greg, in your television time, you've met Berlusconi, and to be described by Silvio Berlusconi as patronising, overbearing, arrogant and offensive, it makes you sort of wonder, doesn't it?
Well, Berlusconi was interesting, as you say. He was certainly effective. I remember when I was running the BBC, I remember the people from Berlusconi's coming in and basically saying, we now control everything in Italy. We control not only the commercial sector of television, it was they owned, but they were now in control of Vice. And they said, we control it all.
Yeah. Kitty, the substance here is, of course, that the Deputy Prime Minister seems to be opening the door to the Conservative right amendments to the Rwanda bill.
Yeah, I don't think he means it. I think in the new year they'll come back and Bill Cash, the veteran Tory MP, he's gone away over Christmas, with his turkey, highlighting bits of paper, saying, what can we do? Can we make it tougher? But the government's argued throughout all of this that you effectively can't make the bill tougher without breaking international law. So there's the kind of margin to change the bill is absolutely tiny. So I think what we'll see in the new year is sort of more fire and light, but we won't actually see any substantive changes, which of course will upset the right of the party, as you can imagine. But they're in a sort of bind, aren't they? What do they do then? If they blinked last week when they abstained on the second reading. If they turn round...
That is the European Research Group basically held the fire. Yes,
exactly. Not just them, though. The so-called five families, that mafiosi term, which everyone... Slightly ridiculous term. But they basically said, we'll abstain on second reading and we will put down amendments, we'll come back next year and we'll see what we can do. However, I think Number 10 have seen this and they've seen that they blinked and they won't do anything about it. They will say, well, what are you going to do? If we don't go any stronger, you can vote down the bill. But then you don't get anything that you want. So I think it'll be quite interesting.
Guto, if you were to bet, do you think they'll get it through?
Really hard to say, but what I would be doing at this point is definitely trying to marginalise this as an issue, not go out of my way to talk it up. And that's what's happening now. We've gone from just there are, a few tens of thousands of people across and the numbers are falling illegally, but we've gone to we're going to be overwhelmed by people coming here in small boats. This is a conspiracy by enemies of Britain to destabilise our society. This is ridiculous stuff. they really ought to be sort of saying, in the great scheme of things, this is a problem, yes, and it's a problem for certain communities, but it's not remotely as big a problem as our economic prospects, as the fact that most people can't see a GP or a dentist for love or money, that we can't build, finish off the job of building one project called HS2. I would just love to see this nerdy, intelligent, hard-working, clean-living Prime Minister of ours knuckle down and play to his strengths, not try and sort of masquerade as some sort of macho man.
Well, it's funny, he seems to be ready to pick fights all over the place. Now, Greg, it looks like he's picking one with Gary Lineker, or at least Dowden's doing it for him.
Yes, I mean...
He says, Gary, stay in your lane.
Yes, but that's a game. That's a game. I don't think that really matters. I mean, it matters, I think, in the BBC. I think there will be a further discussion about whether the guidelines are actually the right guidelines. Personally, I don't think they are.
Really?
Yeah. I don't think... why do you have these guidelines? So that people who are in news and current affairs have to try to be impartial because, and they have to try to not express their views, because it would undermine the programmes they're on. It makes no difference to sport. It makes no difference to entertainment. So it doesn't matter what Gary Lineker says in terms of the BBC. But I think the BBC has still got itself in a difficult position and will have to get out of it at some stage.
No, I slightly worry that, Gary's angling for this job here when he leaves football. But anyway, let's actually talk about the policy, Kitty. You broke the story about the possibility of a ban on under-16s using social media. First of all, how is that possible, number one? And secondly, but Dowden didn't rule it out. Do you think they haven't made up their minds, or they are going to do it? What do you reckon?
I think there's excuse me, there are plans for a consultation in the new year. So the government will look at this and they will invite in, Google and Facebook and TikTok and Snapchat and all these kind of apps that, as parents, none of us have heard of, but our children say, we're using this one. And then they will talk to them and say, what can we... I think it's a position that they're trying to force the companies to beef up their security. And if you sort of dangle this kind of stick of we will ban under-16s from looking at social media, then I think you try and push the big guys into sort of backing down a bit. And I suspect we'll end up with something that looks more like kind of increased parental controls on young teens using social media.
So something is actually going to happen, you reckon?
I think so, although next year, as I expect we'll talk about, we're going to be in an election campaign, right?
Indeed, we will come back to that.
So quickly, I just think we will end up in a position where kind of legislation and sort of the work of government will sort of kind of slowly sort of dissipate and campaigning will start.
Let me ask you to do a bit of translation. Dowden used the words appropriate scepticism when we were talking about the trans guidance. What do you think, Guto, the communications director, what does that mean? Does that mean they're going to change or they're not going to change? What does that mean?
Everybody treads very, very carefully through this minefield because we've seen bigger people than anyone in politics, at the receiving end of vicious campaigns for being seen to be anti-trans. But I think that, there is a strong case for saying that most parents are extremely anxious about schools where, for whatever reason, they think they're encouraging their children to embark on something that, changes them socially to start with, but that's one thing, you can reverse that, but then put someone apart for irreversible change.
Meaning, I like to be called by the name typically associated with another sex.
Using the plural.
But nothing medical.
Singular, nothing medical. But I think that's the beginning, and that's where they sort of do worry. And I remember when I got there, apart from Partygate that dominated everything, I remember sort of saying, we need to have a discussion about what a woman is. And sat down, and it would seem obvious, but it's a tough one. And in the end, we came up with this formula that Boris Johnson, as Prime Minister at the time, said there is a biological reality to being female. Does that mean there's a biological reality that affects prisons? Yes. Sport? Yes. And other things like that. Great. So there are implications.
Great.
I'm quite glad my kids have grown up, really. I think it's a difficult time to bring up kids. If your kids are in school and teenage years, I think it's very difficult. And I think that applies to social media. I think it applies to the whole debate about trans. I feel I'm of an age that I find it difficult to understand almost the debate that goes on. It was not there when I was young. It was not there when I brought my kids up. I find it a difficult debate to follow, really.
OK, next time we'll get some under-30s into the studio.
Yeah.
Well, in addition to Kitty. OK, it's coming up to 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, the Deputy Prime Minister said he doesn't rule out changes to the Rwanda illegal migration bill when it comes back in the new year. Oliver Dowden also said there should be appropriate scepticism about children transitioning in schools. Still plenty to come. We'll hear more from our panel throughout the next hour. In just a moment, I'll speak to Labour's Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. And a little later, we'll hear from England goalkeeper and World Cup hero, Mary Earps. And then I'll be joined by the President of the Board of Deputies, Murray van der Sar. Right, let's turn to Labour now. The party remains well ahead in the polls, but with an election likely next year, there will be increasing impatience to hear more detail on what the party would do in power. The Shadow Health Secretary has been bold in his approach to the NHS, last week saying it uses a winter crisis to get more cash. Not something Labour is promising to deliver. A little earlier, I spoke to Wes Streeting. Wes Streeting, there's a change of tone from the government this morning. David Cameron on Gaza is using the word ceasefire, which Keir Starmer's refused to use. Are you ready to change?
Well, that's not right. I mean, Keir Starmer used the word ceasefire early this week on Radio 4. He's used it previously. The question isn't whether any of us want a ceasefire. Of course, people want to see a ceasefire, an end to this bloody conflict. You look at the images coming out of Gaza, and not just in terms of the overall numbers, which are intolerable losses, but you look at the images coming out of Gaza, the children that are affected, the homes reduced to rubble. It is devastating and distressing. The question is, how do you get from where we are today to where we want to be? I think David Cameron talked about a sustainable ceasefire.
Yes.
And I think that's absolutely right. How do you get from here to there? We all united around the idea that we could achieve a humanitarian pause. That approach, I think, was vindicated to the extent that we got a humanitarian pause for about a week, aiding people out of harm's way. But ultimately, even that agreement broke down. So I think we just got to keep in mind a ceasefire comes about when both parties to the conflict are able to negotiate a ceasefire. We've got to build a political path to that point and then beyond, because I think one of the most distressing things that's happened this week and concerning things that's happened this week was the Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom arguing in very strident terms against the two-state solution.
Well, I think what she said was it's not realistic. I don't think she was particularly strident, but anyway.
Well, I'm afraid what we hear from senior politicians in the Israeli government is a one-state position. And that's not a sustainable solution for peace. The only solution is a two-state solution. That's always been Labour's position. It's always been Britain's position. And I think it is the only solution that will safeguard not just Israeli security, but the Palestinians' legitimate self-determination and right to statehood.
So you're broadly supportive of where Cameron's got to. Let's just talk about one other foreign affairs issue. The Prime Minister's been in Italy. Speaking at a conference, he says that without global action, Britain could be, his word, overwhelmed by illegal migrants. And that could destroy the public's faith in politics and destabilise our societies. You agree?
Well, I thought that was a stunning admission of failure. This is the guy who says, one of my priorities is to stop the boats. I'm doing a really great job. And then the next minute, he's off to Italy to say the quiet bit out loud to all of his right-wing chums from across Europe, which is he's failed. He's failed both to manage an immigration system that works for legal migration. He's failed to tackle illegal migration. And meanwhile, he's pulling his own party apart with this spectacular circus we saw this week. over a policy that will not work and is costing us hundreds of millions of pounds already and threatens to offer us hundreds of millions of pounds more. The only flights the only flights that have taken off to Rwanda are the ones carrying Home Secretaries with hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' cash with nothing in return. So we've got to get a grip on this. Labour's policy on this isn't as gimmicky as the government's, but it is practical and would help us to reduce illegal migration and have a much better managed legal migration system too.
All right, let's spend our time talking about what you might do were you to be elected, and your business is the National Health Service. Let's start with what you told Times last week. You said, I don't think it's good enough that the NHS uses every winter crisis and every challenge it faces as an excuse to ask for more money. Waiting lists at nearly 8 million, ambulances stacked up for hours outside A&E. Seriously, an excuse?
It's an astonishing record of failure from 13 years.
No. Let's deal with your words. Let's not get back on how terrible Tories are.
I'll tell you.
You said, don't use this as an excuse. Seriously, are you calling that an excuse?
I think that when you look at the challenges facing the NHS, not just now but into the long term, we've got the triple whammy of a growing ageing society, rising chronic disease and rising cost pressures. And unless we keep a sharp focus on all three, we threaten to not just overwhelm the NHS in terms of demand, but bankrupt the NHS financially. And what I've been setting out is the case for both investment and reform, because pouring ever-increasing amounts of taxpayers' money into a broken system is wasteful in every sense. It's a waste of money we don't have, it's a waste of time that isn't on the NHS's side, and it's a waste of potential, because I believe from the bottom of my heart that the NHS as a public service, free at the point of use, can exist for the next 75 years. But we've got to modernise and change in order for it to be sustainable in the longer term.
Yeah, we've had this conversation before, but I really want to address what you've been saying. And, it's not a criticism. It's your words. You said also in that same interview you want to shake the NHS and the public out of complacency. We've been reporting on Sky News this week on the NHS. Can we have a camera there next time you tell a nurse who's come off a 12-hour shift that she's complacent?
Hey, I'm not saying that people working in the NHS are complacent. In fact, I'm amplifying their anxieties, their experiences at work.
And I see. You're saying
hang on, Trevor, let me finish. That's a ridiculous thing to say.
Your words.
I've sat in GP surgeries, literally looking over GPs' shoulders as they show me their outdated IT systems and the ridiculous amounts of red tape and accountability measures that they are subjected to, which waste their time that they would rather spend dealing with patients. I've spoken to those nurses and ward staff who are dealing with creaking bureaucracy and outdated systems that hold them back.
By complaining about the crisis. You didn't say that, did you?
I've been complaining about the NHS crisis. It's in its worst state in history, but I'm also saying, especially at a time when the public finances are in a total mess because of 13 years of Conservative mismanagement, that, firstly, there isn't a great deal of money to go around, and we can't be complacent about that. And I think there is a complacency that assumes that we can just turn the taps on.
When you say there is a complacency, put that in active terms. Who's being complacent?
Well, you only need to look at the reaction to what I said in the Sunday Times, that there are plenty of people who believe that the answer to the NHS crisis is simply more money.
Which people?
And look,
Which people?
Well, I mean, I'm surprised you haven't confronted with my social media mentions. They went into meltdown after the Sunday Times.
Come on.
But look,
who are you talking about? If what you want to say is, look, there are doctors or there are managers or what, say that.
Well, I think it's a general complacency. I think it's a general complacency about the NHS, its sustainability and its future. And what I've been setting out over the last 2 years as Shadow Health and Care Secretary are, yes, proposals for investment, fully costed and fully funded, but also linked to reform. For example, the 2 million more appointments that we would deliver at evenings and weekends to cut the backlog. Yes, more appointments, but also the NHS working more efficiently and effectively, as they did at Guy's and St Thomas's. That was on the front page of the Times this week. But we need to see that sort of approach everywhere. When I talk about mental health support in every school and community mental health hubs in every community, a fully costed, fully funded policy. Yes, that's about additional investment for new services, but it's also reducing demand on general practice and keeping people out of A&E.
Right.
So
Right.
there will be investment with Labour, but it's got to be linked to reform. And I am worried about the complacency that against the backdrop of appalling public finances, people assume that an incoming Labour government will just be able to turn the taps on. Even if Rachel Reeves had a complete personality transplant and became a big spending chancellor, she might turn the tap on, but there'd be nothing in the tank. So we've got to be honest about the fact the public finances are in a mess. We've got to get a grip on that. That's why Labour's priority is going for growth. But the answer to the NHS isn't just more money, it's investment and reform that delivers results.
Well, let's talk about the kind of reforms that you might have in mind. You recently visited a high-performing hospital in Singapore. You said you want our hospitals to be more like that, with advanced technology, patient-centred approach, all that. 2/3 of healthcare spending in Singapore is private money. That's even more private sector involvement than in the United States. If you're in Singapore, there are 5 classes of care. You can buy better room and so on, A, B, C and so on. Is that what you want the NHS to become?
No, I'm fully committed to the NHS as a public service, free at the point of use. And whether it's Singapore, Australia, where I was recently, continental Europe, I don't think the problem with the NHS in our country is that it's free at the point of use and publicly funded. It's not the model of funding that's a problem, it's where the money goes. Because when you compare the NHS to other OECD countries, we're pretty much top of the charts in terms of hospital spending. But when it comes to primary care, community services, mental health, diagnostics, we're either near the bottom, at the bottom, or seriously
our
lagging
money,
behind.
We've got enough money, but we're spending it in the wrong places.
In the wrong places. So, for example, there are now 2,000 fewer GPs. Those smaller number of GPs are providing 1 million more appointments than they were before the pandemic, but people still struggle to get a GP appointment. So instead of going to see a GP which costs the NHS 40 quid, they often end up in A&E which costs £400. So that's why I say to the NHS and make the case to the public about Labour's reform agenda, it's not just about more money, it's about where the money goes to get better outcomes for patients and better value for taxpayers' money.
Well, one way that they get better value in Singapore is low-paid labour. 1/3 of the Singapore workforce consists of low-paid Chinese, Filipino and Malaysian immigrant workers. The equivalent here would be to have 25 million immigrant workers. Now, your party wants the number of immigrants down and pay up. How are you going to square that circle? If you want to copy any part of that model, you're going to have to do something like that.
Well, we have an over-reliance on overseas workers working in our health and care system, and that's challenging for 2 reasons. One is we've got a global shortage of health and care workers, so we can't assume that that pool of talent will always be there to draw from. And secondly, the UK is recruiting from red list countries, countries identified by the World Health Organisation as having a serious shortfall of their own. So I think that's immoral. We've got to invest in training our own homegrown talent. That's why we're committed to double the number of medical school places, so we're not turning away thousands of straight A students, but we've also got to improve the pay of care workers so we can recruit and retain those brilliant care professionals who are crucial for the future of meeting the challenges of growing ageing society, rising chronic disease and rising cost pressures.
One last question, which is not about health service, not even really political. On the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being utter devastation, how disappointed are you that Tony Blair says he won't do a David Cameron and come back into government?
Look, unlike David Cameron, Tony Blair doesn't have to return to government to try and rebuild his reputation. David Cameron, I think, had a disastrous legacy as Prime Minister.
Oh, come on.
And
wouldn't it be good to have Tony back round the cabinet table? He's your kind of guy in the Labour Party.
We can call on Tony's advice any time we like, and we often do, but it's no surprise to any of us that he doesn't fancy returning to the House of Lords and returning to Parliament.
Wes Streeting, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Greg Dyke, Guru Harry and Kitty Donaldson are with me again. Greg, Wes Streeting is treading some dangerous territory here on the NHS. What's he trying to do, you think?
I think I basically agree with a lot of what he says. I think, as someone who spent a bit of time in the NHS at one time, I think what he's saying, and I think only the Labour Party can do that. I don't think I think the Tories would be butchered if they said the sort of things he's saying. What he's saying is just spending more money won't solve it. It'll help, but it won't solve it. What you've got to do is look at the way it's organised and run, which is what any other organisation would do. Now, the trouble with the NHS is it's easy to say, it's very hard to do because it's enormous. You know, it's like reorganising the Russian army. You know, it's massive, and somehow you've got to push the power.
Which they mostly do by sending it to war, which you're not going to be able to do.
But you've got to push the power further down in the NHS. I was always convinced of that. And you've got to change the management and all sorts of things. But I think he's right in saying just pouring more money in this won't solve the problem.
Kitty, the NHS attempt at NHS reform seemed to defeat government after government after government.
Yeah.
Any chance with this one?
Well, in the sense, if they win a landslide, which they might, they'll have a mandate to do sweeping reform. The issue, I think, is more sort of technical. If you're going to go for a Singapore-style NHS health, which involves, Gito was just explaining to me, it involves barcodes and turning up and very few clinical staff at the kind of front end. You turn up and you see your data's already there waiting for you. The problem with that, of course, in the UK is that the UK hasn't been able to run a successful IT project in God knows when. So you've either got to find someone to do the IT properly, and you've got to do NHS reform at the same time. So it's, I mean, I hope it happens, but, you know.
Well, you've been in the middle of this, Giorgia. I mean, I suppose what one might say about the whole Singapore comparison is small country, 5.5 million people, 30% of the workforce are immigrant labour, so you can suppress costs. I think the proportion of GDP spent by Singapore is about 4% compared to our 10 or 11%.
Yeah,
Apples and oranges?
I think this is really interesting, though, because he's not saying everything about Singapore is right, but he is saying, as Greg was saying, that we can't just pour money into a system that doesn't use it effectively. And most people's experience of the NHS is that the clinical staff are first rate. They're caring, they're qualified. Everybody ends up singing their praises, understandably. But when you ask, how do you feel about seeing your GP? Can you register with a doctor? These are not the clinical staff letting us down. This is a system that, in terms of its management, is just not working. And an awful lot of money. We spend the equivalent of the GDP of Greece on the NHS. And yet you turn up, and often there's somebody who's got 8, 9, 10 years of education behind them, who's qualified to sort of perform brain surgery, sitting there with a laptop, typing in something that is already known, your address, your religion, your age, all this nonsense. So there's got to be a way of having efficiencies at that end so that these people who are qualified to do medical stuff are unleashed. And then they can start clearing the sort of waiting list. But at the moment, the admin is letting down the sort of fantastic medical staff.
Look, you're all journalists, and I want to take the opportunity to just talk to you about the other sort of big question of the week, or the big talking point of the week, and that has been essentially a series of questions about journalistic ethics. Some of it to do with phone hacking, Prince Harry and so on. Some of it to do with BBC's journalism. We talked about the Lineker thing. Greg, have we got a problem that I suppose was crystallised in what we saw in the courts this week?
I'm not surprised that Prince Harry won. I think phone hacking, I mean, anyone who believed it was only in News International, you know, living in cuckoo land. I mean, everybody knew phone hacking was there and thereabouts in a lot of newspapers. I think we have still got a problem in this country with, although they're less influential, but with newspapers. I still think that some newspapers are incredibly hostile to certain politicians and certain politics. And I think they're quite happy to make stories up, in truth, and that's what it was. And I think if you go back to Leveson, I read today that Labour might not do Leveson 2. I think that will be a shame. I think Leveson 2 is needed.
I hesitate to condemn colleagues, but clearly there are a few bad apples in the press who did hack. I mean, that was been stood up in court. I mean, at Bloomberg we have an incredibly high ethics. The very idea of doing that was just sort of anathema to me. But I think Greg's right. Maybe just for the sort of sake of the industry, we do need Leveson 2. I mean, I think these trials are going to continue, aren't there? There are other ones coming up. So we'll see what comes out in the wash. But don't forget that generation of journalists is largely now sort of moving on. So hopefully the newer generations will just see what's happened and think, no, never again.
Giorgia, just quickly on the last question I asked West Streeting there. Semi-serious, Cameron's back. We've seen in the past, Alec Douglas-Hume came back and to serve under another Prime Minister, William Hague, and so on and so forth. What do you benefit from having, Blair or Brown or...
I think
if there is a Labour government back in it.
I don't think they could afford Tony Blair now, could they? He's got addicted to a certain sort of lifestyle, and as Wes was saying, they can call on his advice whenever they want. I'm going to break ranks on Leveson. I think the last thing we need to do is to pour even more money into the pockets of lawyers to sort of sit there trawling over stuff that has been trawled over to death. I was at News International, now News UK, when there was mass hysteria about phone hacking. It turned out there was a small number of bad apples, to use your words, and most people are good, hard-working, driven journalists who want to hold the rich and powerful to account. And the dice is loaded against the journalist 9 times out of 10. So every time there's a case of a journalist who's overstepped the marks, which is bad, there are more cases where the dice is loaded in favour of the rich and the powerful and the mighty, and the journalist is doing his or her best to sort of get at the truth. So please, no judge dragged in out of retirement to sit there on our television screens with this boring reality TV sort of, beating up people who every day try and make the world a slightly better place.
Indeed, and I suspect at some point we are going to be discussing on this programme what they call the SLAP, strategic litigation, where rich people take journalists to court to protect their reputations. But for another moment, in just a moment, we will hear what this woman, England goalie Mary Earps, famously mouthed after saving that historic penalty in the World Cup final.
Yeah, I think we've got some really terrible lip readers across the country. Really, they've got me all wrong with that. But no, it was just a moment of pure elation, really. I think, and passion.
There is a reason procedures cost more money. If you want to have it in a safe environment, in a hygienic environment with a qualified practitioner, then there is a price tag attached to that. Now, there's been an increase in the number of people travelling abroad to places like Turkey because they're offered with deals that include the flights, the hotel accommodation and the surgery. Common procedures are things like Brazilian butt lifts, breast enhancements, tummy tucks, and even things like gastric bands, which are more medical procedures. And they can suffer horrendous complications either while they're abroad or after they come back. And it's often the NHS that are left to pick up the pieces. It's just like anywhere, you need to properly research the person you're going to. If you look at things that could possibly go wrong, I mean, there's risks of serious consequences. You can have blood clots that can travel to the lungs and cause embolism that can lead to death as well, and people have died abroad.
On a flight on the way home.
Absolutely, and even during the procedure as well, they can inject fat into a major artery, particularly with the Brazilian butt lift, which is why a lot of surgeons in the UK refuse to offer the procedure. So there's plenty of things that can go wrong. If you have complications when you come back, who do you access? You can't go back to the surgeon who carried out the procedure often. I think everyone's entitled to make their own decision. I personally would recommend not travelling abroad, particularly if you're being offered a deal where you're not given the opportunity to think about it properly, you're not given a proper consultation, and you're not made aware fully of the risks. So I'd say be wary of these deals that give you these holiday surgeries. Obviously, there are many, many good surgeons abroad, and if you've done your research properly and you've checked out the facilities, maybe even had a recommendation from someone who's been there, then by all means, you're welcome to do.
Mary Earps was one of the stars of this year's Women's Football World Cup. The goalkeeper was awarded the Golden Glove and became a household name as the Lionesses fell just short of becoming world champions. The tournament was watched by millions on television here, and the women's game has a higher profile than ever. Mary's favourite to win the BBC Sports Personality of the Year tonight. I spoke to her from Manchester this week. Mary Earps, it's been a massive year for you. Golden Gloves at the World Cup. Nominated for the Ballon d'Or. You even had a tram named after you, and I guess I should call you Dr. Earps because you've had an honorary doctorate from Loughborough University. And of course, Sports Personality of the Year. You must be walking on air.
It's been a good year. I'm looking forward to kind of taking some time over Christmas to kind of reflect and take it all in, because I don't think I really have yet. I feel like I've just been going from one thing to the next, and I'm just grateful for it all, really, and very thankful.
You're now one of the faces of women's football and attracting audiences of over 80,000 in the stadium. When you were playing back in Bristol and Birmingham, did you ever imagine that you would rise to those heights?
I always hoped. I think it's sort of a really nice position to be in when I feel like I've seen the game go all the way through its journey, kind of. I played when it wasn't professional. I paid to play. I travelled all sorts of lengths to try and, play at the highest level I possibly could. And I feel like it's all played a part in where I am now. But of course, the game is growing at an incredible rate, and I think rightly so. It's nice to kind of be able to know where it came from, though, and kind of have that grounding. But I'm really excited to see where it's going to continue to get to.
I want to go back to that night in Sydney, World Cup final, and the penalty. That moment's going to live on in football history, and it will always have your name on it. Talk us through the penalty save.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, obviously, I think we were waiting for VAR for a while, trying to figure out if it was going to be given against us or not. I felt like it was obviously quite harsh. And it was one of them where, Spain are an incredible team. For like second half, we were much more in the game than we were in the first half. And, I thought we were really in the game, but to go 2-0 down would have, with not that long to go, would have really killed our chances. So I was just really thinking about trying to help the team, trying to keep the team in the game, trying to call back on my research. It's not always easy. Obviously, penalties a free shot from 12 yards. So the odds aren't really in my favour. And I try and go at it with that mentality of just giving it my absolute best, try and inflict myself on the situation. Doesn't always come off, but thankfully it did in that moment. And it wasn't to be in the game, but that was the penalty save. Yeah, everyone talks to me about that.
You obviously had really researched her, and you guessed right about which side she would go. And you were obviously very pumped up. And, you're now famous for what you said afterwards, which I'm not a lip reader. I think it was something like for Cloughie or something like that. It began with an F. What was that moment like?
I think we've got some really terrible lip readers across the country. Really, they've got me all wrong with that. But no, it was just a moment of pure elation, really. I think, and passion. And football is, it's an emotional game as much as it's a business. It's an emotional game, and of course, it's the World Cup final. The crowd's packed, the crowd's electric, and you're giving it all for your country. You're trying to leave it all out there. So it was definitely a moment where. Emotions boiled over a little bit, and I was just excited that I felt like we could really use that momentum, and I really was convinced that the team would go on and we would win the game. Like, I really felt that in the moment. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way, but we created a lot of chances off the back of it, and I think it was just passions running through my veins, really.
There were millions of us, I guess, feeling it with you at the time. The head of the Football Association, Prince of Wales, Prince William, Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, none of them were there. Do you think they should have been?
Oh, I mean, of course it would have been nice. But to be honest, it's not really something that you take into a lot of consideration. I'm sure they were watching at home, and I know Prince William's been around us quite a few times and has always shown his support. I know people talked about people from different federations and different countries and the presence of their leaders, world leaders being there. But ultimately, that's what happened, and our focus is on the football. And I know that I'd like to think they would have all been behind us regardless. So,
yeah, I'm not trying to get you into anything, but I just, as a supporter, I think I can't help but feel if it had been a men's game, somebody would have turned up. But that's my feeling.
Well, that's your feeling. I'm not going to argue with your feeling whatsoever.
Let me ask you about the shirt question. In a sense, you won on that, and the latest batch I gather sold out in 5 minutes of your shirt. Do you think Nike learnt a lesson from that?
Definitely, I'd like to think so. Obviously, I've been speaking to Nike quite a bit over the course of the year on this topic. You know, they know that they got this wrong, and that's why they've done this correction. And a big company like Nike, they wouldn't do that if they didn't know that it wasn't right and that there was an injustice there. So I think it's great to see that they did the right thing. And really, I can't thank the public enough really for their support. We would not be in this position without it. Because I was really umming and ahhing whether to use my voice and speak on it or not. I thought I was just speaking for a niche of goalkeepers, but it turned out to be a much with support from a much wider group of people, and for that I think collectively we've all changed the world, and yeah, I'm really grateful for that. So thank you to everyone.
We're seeing another, if you like, another barrier being broken down this season. It's just been announced that Rebecca Welch will become the first woman to referee a Premier League match. Do you think that matters? And if you do, why do you think it's taking so long to get here?
Yeah, I think it matters. I think it's fantastic, obviously, for the game. And I think that visibility and representation is so important. So, of course, everyone has to, you know, earn their stripes and earn them opportunities. And Rebecca's done that. And I think it's a fantastic advocacy for the game and for women in sport, but women in industries. You know, it's hard sometimes being a woman. You know, so we just have to keep fighting and keep pushing on and keep working hard to get these opportunities. And I'm sure Rebecca will be absolutely fantastic.
Not everybody has the same view about this, and I'm going to say the words Joey Barton. I don't know how well you know Joey Barton, but he has recently suggested that women are only there to fill quotas. He's also hinted that he thinks that the England men's team would beat the Lionesses. I think number he said is 30-0 in the first half. They played head-to-head. What would you like to say to Joey if you were sitting here in this seat?
Nothing, really. I probably wouldn't entertain that conversation.
You wouldn't take his view about this seriously?
Well, everyone's entitled to their view. That's perfectly fine. But I think from my point of view, I'm not interested in entertaining that rhetoric. So for me, yeah, cool. That's fine. That's your opinion.
Okay.
Fortunately, I think others have different ones.
Okay, the one last one, just from me. I watch A League of Their Own, and you had a very entertaining exchange with Joey Barton, not Joey Barton, I beg your pardon. You had a very entertaining exchange with Jamie Redknapp, who asked if the women's footballers jumped in the bath in the way the men's footballers did. And if I may say so, I thought you put him in his place properly. Have you sort of made up?
Yeah, Jamie has always been, really supportive of me. I've done punditry with him, and I've had a laugh with him before. So we're just having a bit of banter backwards and forwards. But yeah, don't worry, Jamie, I'm having you back here. He's always been great to me, and I don't think he meant it how it came across. But I thought it was funny. I thought it was really funny. Obviously there was a bit of banter between me and Jamie, and then a bit between me and Mo as well. So all's fair in love and war. All good.
Okay, Mary, I'm afraid I'm a blue, but you're a red. But it's been a real pleasure talking to you today, and I wish you well for the rest of the season. Though I hope that you'll go easy on Millie Bright, who was our captain.
No, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Have a great Christmas and a New Year.
Mary Earps. In just a moment, amid a spike in anti-Semitism, we'll hear how Jewish people are feeling at the end of this year. I'll speak to Mary van der Zyl. It's been an incredibly difficult few months for Jewish people in the UK. Following the horrific terrorist attacks by Hamas on October the 7th in Israel, there's been a rise in anti-Semitism here. That's increased further as questions have been raised about Israel's retaliatory actions in Gaza, where many thousands of Palestinian people have died. The Jewish festival of Hanukkah has just drawn to a close, and it's been marked by further acts of vandalism. So how are Britain's Jewish communities feeling? I'm joined now by the President of the Board of Deputies, Mary van der Zyl. I've got your name properly.
Good
Apologies.
morning.
There have been all of these reports. What is the mood in Britain's Jewish communities now?
Everyone of all faiths has got the right to feel safe, and they should feel safe in the UK. Right now, the Jewish community is feeling scared. There was a survey last week by Salvation which reported that 3 out of 4 Jews feel frightened. And that's something that should worry all of us. Look at the pictures behind you. There have been incidents in schools, universities, and the Community Security Trust that monitors anti-Semitism has recorded a 528% increase since the 7th of October, and there's 1,890 incidents which range from assault to vandalism, and schools and universities have become really, really difficult places for Jews.
This isn't the first time that events in the Middle East have triggered a kind of shadow here, but something seems to be different this time.
I agree with you. It is different this time. The 7th of October is a date that most Jews will think of as before the 7th and after the 7th of October. That day was a pogrom, there were barbaric murders, and the sense of trauma that Jews feel here in the UK. And I want to say that I find the pictures of Palestinian children appalling. I don't want anyone to die. I don't want any Palestinian civilians to die. But Jews in the UK have got many friends and families in Israel, and it is an incredibly difficult situation. We all want the war to be finished. We all want to have peace. And the organisation that I represent, the Board of Deputies of British Jews, believes in a two-state solution, a secure Israel with secure borders. But clearly Gaza also has to have a Marshall Plan, and there needs to be peace, and the world community has to implement a two-state solution.
How you say that you and the board favour the two-state solution. The Israeli ambassador in London this week has said her words are absolutely not. How difficult is the stance of the Israeli government? And you're not responsible for them at all. I think we all have to accept that. How difficult do you think the stance of the Israeli government makes it for British Jews?
I think the British Jewish community here and everyone else that I have spoken to are firmly of the view that the hostages have got to be released unconditionally. Rockets are still being fired into Israel. There is a support, of course, for humanitarian pauses, for aid, to get into Gaza. But ultimately, it's only a political solution that can actually work. There has to be a two-state solution. And I'm firmly of that view. And I know that our organisation, we've had a debate, we've had a vote on it. We're also in that territory.
Coming back home, over the last 9 weeks, I've got the sense from Jewish people that I speak to that the thing that is most traumatic in a way is that feeling that folks that they thought would be in their corner, at least empathetic, seem to have gone missing. And examples like the decision of the football authorities not to light up Wembley Arch, the Wembley Arch in Israeli colours after October 7th. Is that familiar to you? Does it matter?
It's very lonely right now being a Jew. The government and the opposition have been incredibly supportive, and without their support it would have been much more difficult. I would say that a lot of relationships have been challenged and stretched, and this is a very, very hard thing to accept. With the Ukraine situation, straight away there were flags in people's houses. Everybody was being supportive. What happened on October the 7th was a barbaric pogrom, and there was some initial sympathy, but that wore off very, very quickly. Israel didn't go looking for any war. There wasn't a war at the time, and it is very hard to accept the lack of sympathy. But what's important is we all have to move forwards. We all need to live together in the UK, and we all have to work on these relationships. And I'm also committed to doing that.
Marie van der Zel, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent, and this is where I grew up. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakulas.
Just met the president and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against. The wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
I never knew they would make it. It's amazing.
Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Rishi Sunak will be glad things have calmed down a bit. There haven't been quite the fireworks of the last few years in Downing Street, but it's still been an extraordinary 12 months of politics. Nothing like the prospect of an election just round the corner. Here's a taster of the political year that was.
I want to make 5 promises to you today.
Have you been honest about your tax affairs, Mr. Zahawi?
Long live the King. Slava Ukraine.
I am announcing my intention to step down as First Minister.
Hamza Yusuf, duly elected as the Scottish National Party leader.
Are you to blame for Labour's anti-Semitism problem, Mr Corbyn?
Jeremy Corbyn will not stand for Labour.
The new Windsor framework respects and protects.
Possibly the biggest decision that Rishi Sunak has taken as Prime Minister.
After months of denials,
I have behaved professionally throughout.
It's all over for Dominic Raab.
Hand on heart, I did not lie to the House.
The report recommended a 90-day suspension.
And he's off. Boris Johnson has quit as an MP.
The Uxbridge by-election won by the Tories because of their opposition to the ULEZ climate change scheme.
Big story is those Conservative losses. Down 24 councils. Labour, the main beneficiaries. Ben Wallace has just resigned, the Defence Secretary.
The Bibby Stockholm is contaminated with Legionella bacteria.
Does anyone ever say, you know what, you've done a good job because everyone else has sat on their and done nothing?
I am ending this long-running saga. I am cancelling the rest of the HS2 project.
Thank you, conference.
Multiculturalism, it has failed. Living in a tent has become a lifestyle choice.
Are you getting sacked for telling the truth, Home Secretary?
David Cameron?
I was not expecting that.
The Supreme Court will deliver its verdict on the government's controversial Rwanda plan.
The Home Secretary's appeal is therefore dismissed.
We will take the extraordinary step of introducing emergency legislation.
It's really unclear, quite frankly, whether this bill will pass.
The ayes have it. Unlocked.
Well, I'm joined again by Greg Dyke, Good O'Harry and Kitty Donaldson. Let's see who they think's had a good year or a bad year. Or let's just start with government. Hasn't had a terrifically Goodyear. And there's a sense of extraordinary instability in politics right now, isn't there?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We've had all these different ministers. We've had so many reshuffles. So, I mean, you know, we had Liz Truss at the end of last year for 49 days or whatever it was.
Remember her.
Remember that. Actually, I was talking to someone who came back from the COP climate talks last weekend, and they were saying, oh, we were chatting with the Chinese, and the Chinese were saying, we just don't know who to deal with anymore, right? Yeah. And I said, my reply was like, well, you know, OK, but that's quite a big stretch in the other direction, right, if you have a sort of CCP-style arrangement. But I suppose they had a point, I suppose.
I was saying at the beginning of this year that the two major parties had contrasting problems, that in Labour's case, the problem was their leader. In Tory's case, the problem was the party. But let's have a look at that graph, if I can, that I showed Oliver Dowden about the popularity of Rishi Sunak, which started at the year about 30 points ahead of his party and has now ended pretty much, here he is. He's the dark blue line. The Tory party is the light blue line. Yeah. And, wow, he's as unpopular as his own party. Good. I mean, this is a problem, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a bad result, really. And I think there was an appetite when he took over, notwithstanding the bad cycle of events that led to that. But when he took over, people thought, right, we just want the politicians to go away now and knuckle down and just sort things out and keep out of my way. And I think that was very welcome. But he is now, you know, a lot more prominent for a lot of things that are actually quite controversial. And he's invited a lot of scrutiny, I think, in the wrong way, and they're not playing him to his strengths. I still think he's got a lot to offer, and the next election need not be the foregone conclusion it's heading towards being at the moment. But the more he's out there playing the macho man, the less credible it is and the less attractive.
We had this conversation last week, actually, that when he embraced the Rwanda policy, the panel that we had last week was basically saying they're puzzled by that, because actually the smart thing, they think, would have been to push it out the door with Suella, but he's embraced it.
Well, I think he was doomed from the moment he took over.
Oh, right.
Right, because I just think that when you go back to the Liz Truss period, that's one of those seminal moments when, you know, when everybody will blame them for doubling the mortgage payments and all the rest of it. And I don't think you can recover from that. So I think we're sitting... It feels like 96 all over. If you're old enough like me, 96 all over again. And it's just a
17 years of Tory government.
Yeah,
Blair
just yeah. Just and all the Labour Party has to do is not blow it, really. Yeah. If it just
I'm going to come to good year, bad year, who's had a good year and bad year, but before I do that, when we come back after the break, we'll be pretty much into the long election campaign. There are people who are saying it's going to be filthy. Kitty, do you make...
I think we've already seen some skirmishes, some early skirmishes in this. If you look at three papers today in the Mail on Sunday, Sunday Times, and I think the Sun, they've all got stories which might or might not come from Lord Ashcroft's biography of Keir Starmer, but he's done a deep dive into...
Lord Ashcroft, the former Tory deputy chairman.
Exactly. Who, looking at when Starmer was a young lawyer, or young lefty lawyer, as the Tories like to say, and I was talking to someone from Labour last week who said, we were prepared for these attacks. But actually, we think that people have moved on from that, that the Starmer they see now is not the Starmer who was, 25, 30, who was taking on kind of slightly controversial cases defending...
supposed terrorists.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So... And also, we've seen some stuff on Twitter. You saw the Tory adverts, and then with the newsreader saying
yes, we played that.
Yes, I bet you did. And then you've got that the Labour version where they had Rishi Sunak like a kind of slightly feeble Thor, kind of like hitting the hammer. So
it's going to be pretty unpleasant.
Yeah.
Okay, you've got 30 seconds each. What was your moment of the year, Guto?
Oh, that's a tough one, isn't it? Moment of the year. I don't know, it was quite dramatic here the other night when the vote was going on, and the Tory party actually stepped back from the brink. And if they come back after Christmas thinking, let's not go and peer over the precipice again, that would be refreshing.
You're talking about politics as opposed to anything.
Give us anything you like. That's your Christmas present.
I thought the England's women's football team getting to the final of the World Cup, pretty good.
OK, that's good for the national psyche.
I just think, it was until they lost, of course, in the final. But, I mean, it was good.
We're used to that.
Yeah, it's good for them. No, we're not used to using... We're used to losing earlier than the finals. So, no, I thought it was... No, I think that was a moment. That was a moment of the year. Politics, I think everybody's had it up to here.
Kitty?
I think, she just showed the clip of Suella Braverman saying living in tents is a lifestyle choice. I think that was the exact moment we can date her future leadership bid to going to the gutter.
Oh, you think we're going to hear more from her?
I suspect after the election she'll put herself forward as one of the candidates to lead the Tory party if the Tories lose. But at that point she lost the room, basically, and in the Tory party, so I don't think she's got the support to run.
OK. Well, you all have been having fun with politicians. I hope you'll all be back next year with whatever's going to happen. Who can tell these days? That's it for this week. Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips for this year. Back in a year. Happy Christmas, everybody.